Not so long ago in Chinatowns around the world, a language called Taisanese or Taisanese was the lingua franca before standard Cantonese and Mandarin. Taisan in Cantonese, and Taisan in Mandarin is known as the first home of the overseas Chinese and is considered the foremost launchpad for immigrants destined for the Americas. Its people, the Taisanese, went through some real dark shit, with many experiencing unimaginable pain, suffering, and isolation. But at the same time, they were true definitions of the word trailblazers for anyone seeking overseas opportunities during the American Gold Rush. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as much as 86% of the Chinese population of North America was of Taisanese descent, making up almost the entirety of the first Chinese diaspora in the Western Hemisphere. The earliest Chinatowns of San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Hawaii, and Seattle were largely founded and established by the Taisanese. Facing persecution, poverty, and perhaps most terrifying, the unknown to any Chinese before them, they laid the path for all other Chinese subgroups to walk for centuries thereafter. But their migration wasn't only confined to the United States. Southeast Asia, Australia, Canada, Mexico, Panama, Peru, Cuba, and the Caribbean were just some of the many destinations for many Taisan natives. How did this group of people navigate the New World, and how did this once unassuming village at the edge of China shape a nation's history?
Let's talk about it, bro.
A small fishing village at the outskirts of an ancient Chinese commandery sits on the frontiers of the known world to the Chinese. 1,000 miles away from the epicenter of the origins of Chinese history and culture in the north, what would later become Taisan is home to the indigenous non-Chinese Yue peoples, who had established an extensive Austronesian diaspora throughout much of modern-day southern China and Southeast Asia, making up today what is known as the ancient Lingnan cultural sphere of influence. But unbeknownst to the Yue tribes, pivotal things are happening within the Yellow River Basin on the other side of East Asia. For the first time, a unified Chinese empire emerges under the leadership of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor, and its eyes are set on the Pearl River Delta, which possesses not only fertile land rivaling that of the Central Plains of the North, but possesses strategic riverways leading to the South China Sea. The Qing court dispatches 500,000 imperial soldiers southbound to civilize all of Baiyue, what would later become Southeast Asia and northern Vietnam. Millions of Yue populations would begin being displaced, killed, or integrated into the Sinosphere, forever transforming the history of these southern lands. However, despite grand-scale Chinese military operations, the process of fully Sinicizing southern China doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process that spans dozens of generations. The vast majority of Baiyue outside of the Chinese commanderies would remain ethnically and culturally Yue for the next millennium and a half. What would become modern-day Taisan is a land of intense political turmoil, where mass migrations of southbound Chinese populations enter the region every year, mostly from the nearby highly Sinicized provincial capital and ancient commandery of Guangzhou. It's a land considered by the imperial court as a dangerous frontierland with large populations of indigenous Yue barbarians. Ethnic tensions and indigenous uprisings against the minority Chinese ruling class are a common occurrence.
In the 12th year of Hongzhi, the land west of Xinhui is set apart as Xingning County to bring order, peace, and prosperity to a tumultuous land.
Translated to New Peace County, the Ming Empire hopes the new county name of Xingning will bring peace and stability to this conflict-riddled land. By this era, Taisan is nearly completely Sinicized. The surviving Yue populations are more or less integrated into Chinese society, with only small pockets of indigenous non-Chinese cultures that are usually confined to rural mountain villages. But a new threat to the Chinese begins looming in distant lands. Europeans and Americans can't get enough of Chinese luxury goods, particularly silk, porcelain, and tea.
Would you like a little more tea?
But generally speaking, the Chinese care little for Western products, and much like the present day, a serious trade imbalance develops between China and the West.
China, 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 China. You go over to China, 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 China.
Silver pours into China on a one-way street, and the Western powers have just about had enough of it. So they come up with an unethical yet ingenious solution. Get the Chinese hooked on opium grown in their Indian colonies. Nearly 300,000 metric tons of opium are being imported into China every year, almost exclusively through Guangzhou, mainly via British and American ships. The Qing emperor, realizing members of his own court are addicted to the narcotic, begins enacting a series of anti-opium policies, and by the turn of the century, outright bans it entirely.
Opium has spread like a plague, corrupting our subjects and emptying our treasury of silver. It is not merely a foreign evil, but a calamity we must uproot with the utmost severity.
But British and American traders had grown far too fat on the unprecedented profits with China to just simply stop trading opium. The area gives rise to the Si dialects, the most prominent of which is Taisanese. Although Si and Standard Cantonese both belong to the Yue branch of Chinese, the languages are generally not mutually intelligible. Historically, the two languages diverged from Middle Chinese, particularly the variation spoken during the Song dynasty, when large numbers of northern Chinese fled into Canton province during the Mongol conquest of Eurasia.
Mongolians? What the hell are they doing here?
However, because Si was less densely populated by Han Chinese people compared to other regions like Guangzhou, where Standard Cantonese was spoken, the Si dialects arguably better preserve Middle Chinese pronunciations.
我 speak Japanese 很好。
我唔係問你日本話，亦都唔係問你蒙古話，我問你識唔識廣東話。
By now, tensions reach a boiling point between British and American opium traders in the Qing dynasty.
If the traffic of opium is not stopped a few decades from now, we shall not only be without soldiers to resist the enemy, but also in want of silver to provide for an army.
British and American ships are boarded by Qing authorities and forced to surrender 20,283 chests and 200 sacks, equating to roughly 1.5 million kilos of opium. The enormous stockpile is mixed with salt and lime and dumped into the harbor in a grand public display to set an example to all those involved in the trade. Ling declares that under pain of death, no foreign merchant nor any Qing official is to continue trafficking opium.
It was terrible! Terrible!
Despite widespread disapproval of the opium trade amongst the American and British populace, British officials, whose pockets are undoubtedly being lined with opium money, vote to declare war against Qing China. Expeditions are launched from Calcutta in British India, and Chinese and British forces clash in and around the Pearl River, Xiamen, and Yangtze deltas. The result is a one-sided beatdown, with Britain displaying a far superior navy, resulting in thousands of Chinese killed in action, and only 69 confirmed British deaths in action. 15 years later, conflict ignites again in the Second Opium War, where China once again embarrassingly loses to Britain and France. In the treaties of Nanjing and Tianjin, China is forced to sign a series of unfair agreements, which among many other items include ceding Chinese territories to Western powers, opening Chinese seaports to foreign trade, legalizing the trade of opium, and forcing China to pay indemnity and compensation to Britain and France. China is left licking her wounds financially and morally. The wars leave devastation throughout the nation, but more importantly, the nation is humiliated on the world stage and social unrest stirs like never before as public opinion of the Manchu-ruled Qing government is at an all-time low. Political turmoil runs rampant throughout southern China, where civilians are beginning to look towards the west for guidance, especially in and around Canton, Macau, and Hong Kong, which have the highest concentrations of foreign influence. Clan wars, religious rebellions, and secret militant societies plague the province as the Qing government begins losing its grasp over southern China. Most historians today consider the rude awakening brought about by the Opium Wars as the first chapter of China's modern history. Now you might wonder, why are we doing such a deep dive on the Opium Wars in a video about Taisan? Well, the Opium Wars played a direct role in positioning Taisan to becoming the first home of the overseas Chinese. The wars crippled the economy of China as a whole, but specifically Guangdong province, which suffers major loss of life, damage to infrastructure, and disruption of commerce. Political turmoil is as high as it's been since Ming China founded Xingning County 350 years prior, and the people are looking for a way out. It just so happens that during and immediately following the Opium Wars, on the other side of the world in Northern California, the gold rush is in full swing. Word spreads throughout Taisan by returning sailors that gold is plentiful and accessible in California, often described as lying on the ground waiting to be picked up. So much so that the region becomes known throughout China as Gamsan, or Gold Mountain, which today is still the name for San Francisco in Chinese. And guess what? Coincidentally, one of the items in the Treaty of Tianjin following the Second Opium War states that British and American ships are allowed to carry indentured Chinese to the Americas, setting the stage for the birth of China's first global diaspora outside of Asia. During this era, the name Taisan has yet to be coined, and the area of what would later become Taisan is part of a region known as Siyi and translates to 4 counties, referring to the former counties of Xinghui, Xingning, Kaiping, and Enping on the west side of the Pearl River Delta.
Towns embowered in bamboo. A species of banyan and other trees meet the eye on every hand. The level portion of the soil is cultivated as only the Chinese know how to do in order to obtain the utmost possible returns from nature. The view appears like a great garden, bounded by ranges of hills.
Members of the Tiandi Hui, or Heaven and Earth Society, a secret society with goals of overthrowing the Qing and restoring the fallen Ming dynasty, overtake the cities of Qingyuan and Conghua in Guangdong, which sparks the beginning of what would be known as the Red Turban Rebellion. To make matters worse for the Qing government, another rebellion was already in effect with the same underlying goals of overthrowing the Manchu-ruled Qing dynasty, the Taiping Rebellion. Some of the leadership between the two rebellions even overlap. The Qing government begins mass purges, executing more than 1 million people throughout Guangdong, and heavy taxes are imposed on the province to pay for counter-revolutionary campaigns, pushing more civilians to support the rebels. After failing to capture Guangzhou, Red Turban forces retreat north, occupy parts of Guangxi province, and proclaim the Daceng Kingdom, and manage to hold out for 9 years. With the aid of the British Navy, Qing forces would eventually crush the last rebel holdout in 1864. Now here's where this rebellion connects back to Taisan. The Hakka, a Chinese subgroup, had for centuries had a substantial population in Guangdong, but were never fully able to integrate into Cantonese society, speaking their own Hakka dialect and preserving much of their own unique culture. They had long been relegated to living in the mountainous regions of the province due to persecution from the local Bandi Cantonese population, who populated the more fertile plains. During the height of the Red Turban Rebellion, the Qing government would capitalize on this centuries-old grudge held by the Hakka and hire them as mercenaries. They were tasked with raiding Bandi villages that were suspected of being rebel sympathizers. For the Hakka, they reveled at the prospect of getting payback against the Bandi oppressors, while getting paid to do it. In response, the Bandi began organizing their own counter-raids on Hakka villages, and full-on civil war erupts in what would be known as the Bandi-Hakka clan wars, with the epicenter of the conflict in Seiyup or Siyi. 500,000 perish and hundreds of villages are destroyed. The Bandi significantly outnumber the Hakka, whose losses are far more extensive. The population share of Hakka in the Siyi area drops below 3%, with many relocating to Guangxi and Southeast Asia. While small-scale emigration was already occurring in the region prior to 1855, it wasn't until the clan wars began that a real fire was lit, fueling the acceleration of emigration abroad. A significant population of Seiyup emigrate to Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, Australia, and the Americas. Many Taisanese, enticed by the prospect of lining their pockets with gold, sign up as contract workers as a quick ticket to America, most famously for the Central Pacific half of America's Transcontinental Railroad, where the Chinese make up 80% of the company's workforce, as they laid track over the mountains and deserts of the West, the majority of which hail from Taisan. The voyage from China to America itself was brutal. Most Taisanese travel under the credit ticket system, borrowing passage costs of about $40 to $50, or roughly a year's income in China, from brokers or relatives, repayable with interest from American earnings. They sail from Guangzhou or Hong Kong on cramped, disease-ridden ships, often taking 60 to 90 days to reach San Francisco. Many would develop scurvy, and mortality rates were as high as 20% on some vessels. If one survived the journey, upon arrival, immigrants face immediate debt and persecution. The vast majority of early Chinese immigrants went into one of two professions: gold mining and railroad labor. In mining and railroad camps, they live in tents or shacks, enduring freezing winters and scorching summers. Isolation is stark, days from towns, surrounded by hostile white settlers. Many who can't withstand the harsh conditions return to Taisan by saving and borrowing enough cash for the voyage, while others only make it back home with the cheaper option of having their bones shipped in a box after dying from violence, accidents, or disease, a fate shared by many. Chinese clan associations provide makeshift communities, offering loans, burials, and mail services to China. After completing a contract job, most Taisanese settle in San Francisco's Chinatown, one of the few places Chinese are allowed to reside. Living quarters are cramped, noisy enclaves of wooden tenements and boarding houses. A typical room houses 10 to 20 men, sleeping in bunks for $1 to $2 a month. Sanitation is poor, open sewers, no running water, breeding deadly diseases like tuberculosis. Food is simple: rice, vegetables, dried fish, occasionally pork. To make matters worse, the Taisanese face intense prejudice and are considered heathens by white Americans.
Which is why I remark, and my language is plain, that for ways that are dark and for tricks that are vain, the heathen Chinese is peculiar, which the same I am free to maintain. Can this be? We are ruined by Chinese cheap labor, and he went for that heathen Chinese.
The 1854 California Supreme Court case, People v. Hall, barred Chinese testimony against whites, leaving them vulnerable to violence and theft. A testament to this was in 1871 in Los Angeles, after a gunfight between two Chinese groups results in the death of a bystander, Robert Thompson, a popular saloon owner. A riot of 500 men forms, making up 10% of the city at the time, and marches through the streets, and by the next morning, 18 Chinese men have been lynched, only one of which was thought to have actually participated in the gunfight. Of the 25 men indicted for murder, none faced any jail time. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act later banned new immigration and citizenship, the first ever federal law to ban an ethnic group explicitly. But despite all the challenges set before them, many Taisanese would thrive in America. Li Chu arrived in San Francisco in 1851, drawn by gold rush tales. He earned $4 a day initially, far more than the pennies he'd made farming in Taisan, but faced hostility.
The white men would drive us off with clubs if we found a good spot. The $20 foreign miners tax ate away almost all my profits. We panned the river for weeks, finding dust, only enough for rice.
After 2 years, he moved to San Francisco, opening a laundry with savings. He noted the racism.
They call us Chinamen and kick us in the streets, but I send $50 home each year.
Li's laundry thrived, employing kin, and he returned to Taisan in the 1870s to build a family home, typical of successful sojourners. Chin Gi-hee arrived in the US in the late 1860s. Chin worked on the Central Pacific Railroad, enduring Sierra winters and dynamite blasts, tasks white workers avoided.
We hung in baskets over cliffs to set explosives. Many fell or froze.
Earning $28 a month, he saved half to repay his passage and send home. After the railroad's 1869 completion, he moved to Seattle, opening a labor contracting firm, Quang Tuck Company, recruiting Taisanese for cannery and logging jobs. Facing anti-Chinese riots in 1885, he armed his workers and fended off rioters, likely saving many Chinese lives. He returned to China in 1904, funding Taisan's first railroad with his wealth. Starting as a miner, Lum Ah Chu arrived in the US in the 1850s. He pivoted to trade, opening a store in Chinatown selling dried goods and herbs. He faced the 1877 anti-Chinese riots, barricading his shop. As a Say Yup Association elder, he mediated disputes, organized burials, and sent $200 yearly to Taisan kin. He died in 1885, his savings funding a school back home. Much of the money sent back to Taisan by these Chinese Americans is used to fund Diaolo towers, fortified multi-story watchtowers in rural villages, mostly in Guangdong, to offer protection to family members from war and bandits during this tumultuous era, as the late Qing government and early republic had weak centralized control over the nation. Though the watchtower's origins can be traced as far back as the Ming Dynasty, the prevalence of Diaolo culture peaked during the warlord era in the 1920s, with more than 3,000 of these structures. Today, most of the towers are abandoned, though some have been designated as World Heritage Sites by UNESCO, honoring the memory of the early overseas Taisanese. Despite many cases of successful Chinese entrepreneurs, most struggled financially as no whites would hire Chinese outside of low-paying labor positions. As a result, many of San Francisco Chinatown's inhabitants turned to crime to stave off poverty. Mutual aid societies known as the Tongs, which are made up of 70 to 80% Taisanese men, began with benevolent intentions of offering a support system to Chinese immigrants. However, over time, many evolved into criminal organizations running opium dens, gambling houses, prostitution rings, and extortion rackets. Their enforcers, called hatchet men or highbinders, use violence to maintain power, turning Chinatown into a battleground. Chinatown is infamous for its labyrinth of underground tunnels designed to evade police raids. From the 19th century through the 1920s, wars between the Tongs ignites, making Chinatown one of the most dangerous districts in the city. The most notable of the Tongs are the Heap Sing, Sui Sing, Bing Kung, Hop Sing, Chi Kung. Eventually, after decades of violence, peace agreements, police crackdowns, and widening work opportunities for Chinese citizens lead to a decline in violence. However, the Tongs' legacies live on, as many still exist today as fraternal organizations. This era is extremely difficult on Chinese women in America. They are outnumbered by Chinese men 27 to 1, and 3 out of 4 are forced to work in the sex industry. It wasn't uncommon for women to be shanghaied in Guangdong and brought to California as sex slaves. This gender imbalance was partly preserved because of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, deterring further Chinese immigration until its complete abolition in 1965. This meant that for over a century, the Taisanese had all of America to themselves, with their community composed almost exclusively of those early male laborers that migrated to the United States within that short 4-decade window. This meant that up until 1965, the lingua franca of virtually all Chinatowns in the US was Taisanese, and it wasn't really until the 1970s, when large numbers from Guangzhou and its satellite cities, and later Hong Kongers that predominantly spoke Standard Cantonese, started migrating to the US in significant numbers, eventually surpassing the Taisanese population. Under the leadership of China's First Republic, Xingning County is finally given its modern name, Taisan, in order to avoid confusion with other counties throughout China with the same Xingning name. Throughout the 20th century, despite their small population, a disproportionate number of Taisanese would play influential roles in Chinese culture, entertainment, military, and academia. Taisan has produced the largest number of Chinese actors and singers of any region in mainland China. Say Yup, or Jiangmen, is considered the home of Chinese academicians, a title gifted by the world's largest research institution, the Chinese Academy of Sciences. The total number of academicians is 31 people. A city with over 20 is considered extremely rare in China. 1/4 of the Flying Tigers, the most famous joint American-Chinese group of airmen who successfully fought the Japanese before the US entered the Second World War, hailed from Taisan. This is especially impressive given that this group was active during an era where few Chinese pilots had the resources or skills to battle the Japanese in the skies. In the US, the Taisanese fared no worse than in China, being the first Asian Americans to be elected into high office positions in the continental US. One notable example is Gary Fay Locke. With ancestry from Jilong Village, Taisan, he is a third-generation Taisanese American, having served as the 21st governor of Washington State, Obama's Secretary of Commerce, and ambassador to China. Today, there are 500,000 people of Taisanese ancestry in America. Though they no longer represent the majority of the Chinese American population, their legacy will never be forgotten. It's without a doubt, they were the pioneers that faced the unknown and sacrificed blood, sweat, and tears so that later immigrants may walk an easier road in their pursuits of happiness. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It makes a huge difference in allowing me to create more content like this.